For our message this morning, I invite you to turn to Psalm 46. Consider this psalm together. And while you're going there, I did remember another announcement I wanted to mention. This is next week. We have a special speaker, and this is Tim Barton from Wall Builders. And he was here, I would say 5 or 6 years ago since he's been here. He's speaking at a banquet for Sage Investments where Josh works, and the church asked him as well to speak here. He draws in some history and a biblical perspective on that, and I think many of you have heard of him or about him, and very interesting and engaging. We have him scheduled for Sunday school next week and the evening service. So he'll be here in Sunday school for the adults in this room, and then he'll be here in the evening service over in the sanctuary next week, and we hope you're able to be here as a part of that. Should be very interesting. We're looking forward to that. Psalm 46 this morning is the passage I'd like us to give some attention to. We're not aware exactly who wrote this, though there have been different theories, and we're not aware either what the historical background of the psalm is, but very possibly some victory that the Lord has provided for His people. It's a very dear passage to many people's hearts, and very appropriate for facing trials and depending on the Lord through them. So let's ask God's blessing on His Word this morning, then we'll consider this together. Lord, we thank You for Your Word. We thank You for the time to gather and to look at what You've provided for us, and we pray that we would set aside the cares of life, that we turn our focus and our attention to You and what You have done for us and what You've given to us, the resources that You've provided through Your Word. We pray that Your Spirit would open our eyes, that we depend on You, and that we'd faithfully look at Your Word this morning. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Several weeks ago now, you probably observed on the news as Hurricane Ian barreled towards the west coast of Florida, and it approached a Category 5 hurricane. And I'm sure you likely have seen, as I have, some of the pictures of that devastation. It was widespread. It was going right towards Tampa, which had not been hit by a major hurricane in decades, I believe, and turned south just before and hit the Fort Myers area. You can easily find many stories of people who thought that they were safe. They thought that their home or wherever they were holing up during the storm would withstand, that the walls were strong enough, that their home was high enough above ground, that they could stand against the wind and the waves and the flooding. I read about one woman. She considered the elevation of her house. It was 11 feet above sea level, and she thought that was sufficient. And the waves not only came into her house, but came and touched the balcony on the second floor. Read another account of a couple who went to the nursing home and pulled out their mother, who was just weeks away from turning 90 years old, and brought her to their home because they thought that was the safest place for her. And then the flood came into their home. And the husband was carrying the wife and the mother through chest-deep water to safety. Or one more, and this one I think just perfectly pictures what this psalm's going to picture for us. This lady had stayed in her house through past storms and even hurricanes. And so she thought, it's always worked before, but this time the storm was too big. And she experienced the flooding. And she said, this time I made a mistake. We see in Scripture from time to time the trials of life described as storms. And when there's a storm that comes into our lives, whatever the severity of it, from large storms that upheave your entire life to minor storms just of the day, we've got to have a refuge. And that refuge has to be sure and reliable, a place that we can run to in time of trouble. And what the Lord's going to provide for us this morning is the right refuge for us. And there's only one. There's nothing else that we can place our faith and trust in through the trials of life. There's only one refuge, and he shows up right in the first word of verse 1. Who is our refuge? It's God. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. He's a refuge. He's a place to hide, a protection for us when we are in a time of need. This same word refuge we see in another psalm, Psalm 104, talking about the wild goats. They live up in the hills, and the hills are a refuge for them, a place of safety. God is our place of safety. Not only our refuge, but God is our strength. He's the one that is going to provide the help that you need. And you and I are very aware that when trials come into our lives, they can be tiring, can't they? They can go on, and we need daily strength for the trials that God has allowed. And a third description here of God's character: He's our refuge, He's our strength. He is a very present help in trouble. Very literally here, present help, or a very present help, is a help that is much to be found, often to be found. How often? All the time. God is very present. He is always available to help when we have a time of need. We really have no other resource that is just like that. And we are commonly frustrated by people that are not available to help when we think that they should be. Years ago, I recall, here we have a plane ticket scheduled for the holidays, and an email comes through telling me that that particular airline has decided they're no longer flying out of that airport, and to call this number to reschedule your flight. Well, if you've ever tried to call an airline, you're probably familiar that they don't pick up on the first ring. There was some time of waiting and some time of listening to the menu, and then eventually I had specifically called them at a time where I had a long time to wait because I guessed maybe I would need that. That was not even an option. The recorded voice came on and said, "We're not able to keep you on hold anymore, and put your number in, and we'll give you a call back sometime in the next several hours." And so I kept my phone within reach, and it just so happened, as you can imagine in a busy house with lots of kids, that when the phone rang, I was a few rooms away. And as I ran through the house, jumping over toys and all kinds of other things, and probably opening gates that were keeping the kids out of the wrong place of the house, I picked the phone up 1 second too late. There went all the time, so I called again. Now I'm at the back of the line again. That's not a very present help, is it? Not a help when you need it. The Lord, in contrast, because of His character, He is omnipresent. He is everywhere that you are, and every time you need help, He is available. He is omniscient. He knows all of your needs, even if they're not even spoken, and they just run through your mind. The Lord knows, and the Lord is able to be a help. And we need this because the last word of verse 1 describes trouble, and then it's expanded on in verses 2 and 3. What might trouble look like? Well, there's several descriptions here. These are all physical descriptions, but they picture for us what storms and trials of life look like. Verse 2, therefore will not we fear. Here's the first description. Though the earth be removed or changed, though the earth gives way. And what might that look like? Well, let's continue to read here. Though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, or the heart of the sea. Here you think of a mountain slipping or falling into the ocean. I don't know that any of us has ever experienced watching that, but if you were there and you're watching the mountain slide into the ocean, what would you feel like you could do to stop it? Nothing. There's a feeling of helplessness, of powerlessness. This is beyond my control, outside the scope of what I can handle. Verse 3 continues another description. Though the waters thereof roar and be troubled. Here we're picturing the oceans, and there's two descriptions. One has to do with the sound of the ocean. They're murmuring or roaring. You think of waves crashing all around, and the sound of that. And then the troubling, that's like foaming up. That's the visual of the ocean, the waves breaking and crashing, the water being stirred up and rising and falling. And imagine, you're not sitting at home watching this on a videotape. You're in the ocean. What are you feeling like? Overwhelmed, right? You can't do anything. You're struggling to stay afloat. See, these pictures are used to describe trials of life because we feel similarly. We feel overwhelmed. We feel helpless. We feel powerless to do anything about what's going on around us. And the last description in verse 3, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. The shaking here, or the quaking, now picture an earthquake. Another thing most of us likely have not experienced. But picture yourself, here you are. Here's an earthquake. The mountains are shaking. Structures are falling. Where are you safe? Where do you go? All of these descriptions signal helplessness, inability to do anything, something that is outside of our control. And we face trials like this. We look around the church family and we look at the prayer list, and there are people who are facing immense trials. People who've lost a loved one, or perhaps are about to lose a loved one, and all of God's people are touched by those things. There are financial trials, health trials. There's maybe not as big trials in the scope of life, but things like your car breaking down, or your heat going out in your house. Just things day to day, there are storms that come in that feel outside of our control. And our natural temptation when those things come is to fear, to worry. What am I going to do? How am I going to make it through this? This is exactly what we're told in this passage not to do. Verse 2, see the beginning? Therefore will not we fear. God says because of the refuge that we have in Him, we don't have to sit around and worry and doubt and fear. Why? Because God is our refuge and strength, and God is a very present help to us in our trouble. What does it look like when the seas are churning and the mountains are shaking? Sometimes it's sitting by a loved one in a hospital room. And what's the feeling? Uncertainty. What's going to happen? What's the next step? And what should the family do? And all of this swirling around, and what do we need in those cases? We need a refuge. We need to turn to the one who is our refuge and strength, the very present help in trouble. Sometimes a trial of life is you checking out at the supermarket and then looking at the receipt, realizing that what used to buy so much food doesn't buy as much anymore. And that's taking a chunk out of your budget. Or maybe it's looking at your 401k and what you've planned for the future, and now there's been a significant change in that. And what are you going to do? That's a trial, a storm that comes. What do you need? A refuge. There's a temptation to fear, and God says to put your trust in Him and in Him alone. The last word there in verse 3, the word Selah there, is a word that we find primarily throughout the Psalms, a word that is a little uncertain as to the exact meaning, but most likely it's some indication that we should pause and consider what is being said. It might be a musical notation. There's no clear meaning of the word, but it's a good point to stop and reflect. This is true. This is reality. God's word shares with us what is true. The storms of life cause upheaval, but God is a refuge and a strength through each one of those. And then the scene changes in verse 4. From being in the ocean in the middle of a storm or being on a mountain that is shaking, now there's a scene that's very calm and peaceful. Look with me at verse 4. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. Tabernacles there, that word means dwelling place, and that's why the tabernacle is called the tabernacle in the Old Testament, because it's God's dwelling place. So this is the place where God dwells, and the picture here is very serene, very calm. Here there is a river flowing. The streams are providing joy. It says it makes glad the city of God. Can you just picture this? Calmness, peace. This is what God provides. And it's not necessarily that He's removed the storm, though sometimes He chooses to do that. But even in the midst of the storm, this is what is available to God's people. That everything around is swirling out of control, but there is an inner peace and calmness as pictured here in this verse. Rivers typically, unless it's a raging river, provide this scenic quality. We had the opportunity a few months ago to sit on the Delaware for a few days right on the edge of the river, and we went out there often and got to observe. Here it just flows by peacefully, hardly ever changing. And there'll be some rock there, and what does the water do? It comes and the rock changes the direction, and just hour after hour the water does that same pattern around the rock. Just a calming type of atmosphere, enjoying God's creation. Now, there's another factor here. It's because this is where God dwells. Verse 5, God is in the midst of her. That's describing God's presence. As we saw in verse 1, a very present help. A peace is only available with God's presence. There's no other place to find it. And you'll find no end of people trying to offer peace in some other way than God. Very popular in our time now, it's described as a whole industry of wellness. And it's typically not referring to health, it's mind, your mental, your spiritual well-being. And here there are exercises to do to control your breathing and to calm yourself down and to focus your mind where it needs to be. But that path will not provide genuine peace and satisfaction when it's not tied to the God who is the refuge and strength. God is the one who provides the peace that we need with His presence. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. Here, there's some stability. Everything around is shaking, but there's some stability for us. There's no shaking or toppling over because God is present. And God shall help her. He provides the help that we need. See here, God is not indifferent. He's not observing casually and hoping that we just work out our problems by ourselves, and really that would save Him a lot of trouble. If we could just work a little harder, be a little more diligent, be a little more prepared, and really not have to rely on Him so much, that would be kind of nice. I experience this with my kids from time to time, or maybe more often than that. Well, it'd be nice if they grew out of this phase. And it'd be nice if they tied their shoes by themselves. It'd be nice if they could walk across the parking lot and didn't expect to be carried, because there's lots of other things to carry. It'd be nice if they didn't run for a problem that they really should be able to solve by themselves. And I hope it's a wonderful stage of life, but some things you want them to grow out of, right? But that's not the way that God views us. He doesn't look down and say, oh, come on, I've helped you through several health difficulties. Just go on your own for this one. You should be able to do it. No, he is an ever-present help, and he wants to be an aid to his people. And the last phrase of that verse, verse 5, says, right early. This is the way that the King James decided to translate this. The idea here is that it's at the turn of the morning, at the break of dawn, right early. What would perhaps be the significance of that? Well, we're familiar with the idea of trials corresponding to darkness. So what would the hope and the help that God provides correspond to? The light, the morning, right? And here you imagine, we don't have nearly as many, we can't sympathize with this as well because we have electricity. We can be up in the middle of the night and do whatever we want. Think back until the modern century, what did people do when the darkness came? You couldn't do very much. They went to bed, right? Until the light came in the morning. You couldn't do things without the light. But when the light comes, there's some ability to do something. There's some help. Maybe even picture it as the light at the end of a tunnel. And you're feeling like the trial is the tunnel and you don't see an end. But then there's a light. The light is the hope that God provides, and knowing that God is going to be with you through whatever he allows you to face. And which, by the way, before we go to the next verse, here we are, it's dark, it's the waning hours of the night. How certain are we that the morning is coming? It comes every day, doesn't it? There's not been a day where the sun decided that it was just not going to rise. How certain are we that God's going to provide the help that we need? If we know the Lord, we rely on the Lord, he's providing everything that we need through a trial. God also provides both protection and judgment. We see this now in going into verse 6. The heathen there, the nations, anyone that opposes God, are raging or troubling, crying out. There's an uproar. The kingdoms are moved. These are nations of the earth. They're moved. They're shaken. He utters his voice. The earth melts. This is describing that there are many throughout the world, kingdoms, people that oppose God. And that can cause some genuine difficulty for God's people, but it doesn't cause any difficulty for God. God opens his mouth. He speaks, and it says the earth melts. We see people, ungodly people in positions of leadership in our country, and that might cause us to be tempted to fear what is going on, which direction is the country going, and what's going to happen even after the elections. And God says, don't fear. It doesn't mean you can't be involved. Certainly do your civic duty and participate in voting, but don't stake your claim on a candidate. A candidate is not your refuge or your strength. A political party is not our refuge or strength. The Lord is our refuge and our strength. We see people high up in business. It seems every day. Here's a news story of a CEO or some other business leader taking a stand for something that has nothing to do with their company whatsoever, but they know that it's popular and it stands against God's word. And God's people appear to be more and more in the minority, but God will judge. And when God judges, those who oppose God are going to find that they have no real influence, that there's no lasting influence that they have. God chooses in his timing to judge some unbelievers in this life, but all who oppose God are going to face God's judgment in eternity. You'll read quite often in opinion articles or news articles about something being on the right side of history. And right now, what everyone thinks is the right side of history is whatever is popular today. And next week, you'll probably be on the wrong side of history because of what you believe today, and the moods change. But there's only one right side of history. It's the side that God is on. God is the one who is the place of safety. And if you're on the wrong side, there's no safety for you there. Now, this is the closest we come in this passage to seeing the truth. That this is not just a blanket offer to everyone in the world, that God is going to be their refuge and strength. There's got to be some relationship there. Those who oppose God don't find God to be a refuge. They find God as opposition. And the only way to find the peace described here, as we see in verse 4, and to find the strength and refuge in God, is to have that personal connection through Jesus Christ. To have trusted Christ as your personal Savior, realizing your sin and how it separates you from God, believing that Jesus died on the cross, and asking God to save you from your sin. Without that, you'll feel like you're drifting in the ocean and there is no refuge for you. But the connection to God and a trust in the Lord, that's where the provision comes from. And verse 7 finishes, really, you could probably break the psalm into two parts here. Finishes the first part of the psalm, describing again what God is for us and what that should mean to us. There's two descriptions of the Lord, or two names of the Lord. The Lord of hosts. This is the Lord there, that's the personal name of God. Sometimes we translate it as Yahweh or Jehovah. Those are really the same, just the vowels have been changed some there. This is God's personal name, showing that He loves His people and He cares about His people. But when you see the Lord of hosts, that adds a new dimension. Hosts here is armies. The Lord of hosts is the Lord of armies, and this shows God's power, all that God brings to any given situation. Do you remember the story of Elisha, 2 Kings chapter 6? And here the city is surrounded by the enemy, and Elisha and his servant stand at the city wall, and they look out, and they're surrounded. And what does the servant feel like? This is bad news. There's no way around this. There's no way out. There's no solution. What does Elisha say? Let me read it for you. He says, the servant went out, saw the host compass the city with horses and chariots, and the servant said, Master, what shall we do? And Elisha said, Fear not, those that are with us are more than those that are against us. And then, remember, Elisha prayed and asked the Lord to open the servant's eyes, and what did the servant see? That there were angels surrounding. He got a glimpse into the spiritual. That's true in our world as well, that this is the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies. He has unlimited resources. We just don't see it, but it's just as real, even if our eyes are not able to visualize it. And this God, the God of armies, very significant. It says, with us. He's not just around somewhere doing something. He is right with you, able to carry you through any trial that you are facing. Doesn't matter how hard the trial is, how long the trial is, what the difficulty is, it's not too much for the Lord. The Lord of hosts is with us. A second name of God here is the God of Jacob. Here's more an emphasis not on God's power, but on God's faithfulness and His covenant keeping, because He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the one who made these promises in the Old Testament. And then as we continue to read through Scripture, what did God do about those promises? Did He push them to the wayside and forget about them? No, He keeps them. When God promises something, He keeps that promise. He promised things to Jacob. He fulfills those promises. He's promised things to you, and He fulfills those promises as well. God has promises like we've seen as we looked at 1 Peter in chapter 5, casting all your cares on Him. Because what does God promise? He cares for you. And God is never going to go back on that. Hebrews chapter 13, the Lord says, I will never leave you or forsake you, and you can bank on that promise. No matter how dark the night is that you are going through in the moment, God is not going to leave you. God is not going to forsake you. He is going to stay faithful to the promises that He has made. And then the word refuge, again, is at the end of verse 7. The God of Jacob is our refuge. This is a different word than the refuge we saw in verse 1, but the idea is similar. This word, though, is the idea of a stronghold. Not just a safe place like a little rock that there's an outcropping of rock and you're kind of underneath and the rain is not getting you, but you're still experiencing the cold and the wind, or a tree that's blocking some of the rain, but some of it is getting through. No, this is like a castle, a stronghold, a place of great safety. We saw a place like this over in Israel years ago. That was a fortress that was built by Herod many centuries ago. It still stands today. It's just a tourist site now. The place was elevated up off the ground, and it had a very difficult path. It was kind of situated in the hills as some natural protection. The big stone walls all around, everything made of stone, and here and there were windows, and the windows were like small arrow slits, tall and very narrow, so you could attack out, but you were protected from the enemy's attack. There's the idea there of a stronghold in the day of trouble. And that's what the Lord is to those that place their trust in Him. What happens, though, when you're there and the enemy approaches and the stronghold is available? You just don't go inside. Now you're susceptible. Now you don't have the protection. God offers this protection, this refuge for us. Too often, we decide we're not going to take advantage of it. We're going to trust in someone or something else. Verse 8 here turns a little bit different direction, describing God's works here, and it says, "Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what God has done." An encouragement to us to put our trust in the right place is to look at what God has already done. Well, let's consider several aspects of that. We see, first of all, what God has done right here recorded in His Word. Has God done some amazing things that we can read about? We wouldn't have time to enumerate them. God parted the Red Sea for His people. God used David to kill the giant Goliath. God defeated, do you remember the Assyrian army, the 180-some thousand soldiers surrounding Jerusalem? And here the king prays and asks for God's help, and in the middle of the night, the angel of the Lord kills the soldiers, and they wake up, and they're all dead. God raised people to life. God did things like healing lepers and feeding the 5,000. All of these are works that when we look at, and this is one of many purposes of reading God's Word regularly, is that we are continuously reminding ourselves of the things that God has done. God is the one who worked in this situation centuries ago. God is the one who can work in my situation today. And reminding ourselves of the works of the Lord. We can also look back at our own lives. And if you know the Lord as Savior, God's done something in your life. And God's probably done many more than just one thing. God's probably done many things where you can point back and say, I didn't know what I was going to do in this situation. Everything was out of control at this time of my life. This was a dark time. And what did the Lord do? He led me through. And if He did that then, what will He do again? He'll lead me through again. Verse 8 continues and says, "What desolations God has made in the earth." And then here's this description in verse 9. "He makes wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in sunder. He burns the chariot in the fire." Here's a description of what God can do and what God will do in the end times. He will be the final victor over every enemy. It says he makes wars cease. Wouldn't that be nice in our world? It says that describes all these weapons, a bow and a spear and a chariot, and what does God do with them? He breaks them, he shatters them, he burns them. You don't need them anymore because God is the ultimate victor. And we see this in Revelation, that here God comes at the end of the world when all the world gathers against the Lord and Christ returns. And this is not a battle that he barely wins with lots of casualties and lots of losses. He appears and he speaks and defeats the enemy. There's basically not even a battle. Here again is a reminder that there are all kinds of world events. We see them in history and we see them today that are far outside of our control, but they remain firmly within God's control. So perhaps we read the news and we wonder, is there going to be some kind of nuclear encounter over in Europe sometime? Got a dictator backed against the wall who's been losing some ground. What's going to happen? We don't know, but we do know something. God says, don't fear. God says he's the refuge. He's the strength. He can do whatever he wants in every situation, and he will make all things right in his timing. Verse 10 describes, let's look at the second half of the verse first. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. Here, the description is God being lifted up. The heathen are those who don't believe. Across the earth, God is going to be exalted. God is going to be lifted up. That reminds us of a passage like Philippians 2 that says, at the name of Jesus, every knee will do what? Every knee will bow. God is going to be lifted up and exalted. No world power, no politician, no ruler, no matter how much strong they seem or how much influence they seem to have, no one has ultimate victory over God. And so we have a crucial command here in verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. And we really need to get the idea of what it means to be still. Very, very literally, the word has the idea of relaxing, which sounds nice, go lay down on the couch and find some entertainment and just relax and just trust, let God take care of all of the things and I'm just going to enjoy myself. The point is not that we're relaxing in that sense. What the Lord is saying here is let go of whatever else you're holding on to. Stop fighting in your own strength. Stop striving in your own power. Be still. It doesn't mean that you do nothing. Here, trials come in our lives, and there's decisions to make. There are things to be done. There is wisdom needed to make the right decision. We don't sit down and say, well, I'm supposed to be still, so we're just not going to make a decision in this case. No, there are things to do, but where is the dependence? It's not on ourselves. It's on the Lord. We need to stop trusting in anything besides God. We can't trust in our own strength because we all realize, we've all experienced, our strength runs out fairly quickly. We get tired. We get sick. We can't do everything. We've got to trust in the one who is our strength. We can't trust in our finances. This is a temptation for God's people, particularly in a first world country. I've got enough to cover whatever emergency comes. But that can't be where our trust is. And we've all seen, even recently, here's some savings that we have that are supposed to cover whatever arises, and now the savings can't do as much as they did before. And that's not where our trust should be. It should be in the Lord and in Him alone. Be still and remind yourself of a truth. Know that I am God. Remind yourself of what God is like. Increase your knowledge of God. Go to God's Word. Spend time in God's Word and in prayer, and remind yourself of the works of God that He has done, and put your trust in God and see Him work in His timing. You'll experience more and more that God works in your life one situation at a time, providing exactly what you need in every trial. It's a little bit ironic that when our life gets busy, because our schedule gets full or because there are unplanned emergencies or circumstances, that we find that we don't really have much time for God's Word anymore because there's been extra things placed on our schedule. Oh, but in the midst of a trial, what do we need more of? More time in God's Word. We need more attention to God. We need to set aside other things. These are temporal things. These have no value. I've got to set my mind on what is true and what is eternal. I think a wonderful, perhaps, description or illustration of this idea of relaxing or letting go, occurred a few weeks ago when I was either in the house or just outside, and I heard screaming from the other side of the yard. So as a typical parent, I first try to discern which type of screaming this is. Is it the screaming of pure joy and delight? Sometimes it is. And you think there's a problem, and then you realize there's laughter and everything's fine. It wasn't that. It also was not the screaming of arguing and rivalry and someone who took a toy out of someone else's hand. This was sheer terror, fear. You can just tell the difference, that someone is genuinely afraid, and so I start to jog that direction. And here we've got an apple tree that the kids like to climb, and it's not very tall, which is fortunate, or at least the part that you can climb on is not very tall. But here's a little girl who's gotten a little higher than maybe she expected, or she thought she could go higher than she could. She's lost her balance, and now she's hanging on the underside of the branch, kind of like a sloth, with her arms wrapped around and her legs wrapped around. And it's terror. And it's probably about as high as my shoulder. This is not a long fall, but you know the feeling of being out of control. And what do? How are you going to make everything right again? And so she calls for help, and the help arrives. Here I am. I'm here to help you. And she won't let go. Right? It doesn't matter that I'm standing there. It doesn't matter that I'm saying everything's okay. I'm standing right here. Even when I have my hands on her, here, I've got you. She won't let go. I think that's a little bit of a picture of this. What's the idea of relax or be still? Let go of whatever else you're trusting in. That's not going to carry you through. Trust the one who's going to help you and nothing else. It's not God and my own strength, God and my money, God and my skills, God and my resources. It's just God. Depend on God only for whatever help you need. Could I invite you just a few pages, if you'd like to turn to Psalm 62. It's probably just 3 or 5 pages away, because the word refuge shows up in this verse and reminds us what we should be doing in order to put God as our refuge. Hopefully this passage makes us realize we need this, but how do we put it into practice? Just one short verse in Psalm 62 that says, verse 8, Psalm 62:8 says, "Trust in Him at all times, you people. Pour out your heart before Him." God is a refuge for us. There again, the word refuge is there. How do you make God your refuge? You pour out your heart to Him. You pray. You ask for God's help. So whatever situation it is, maybe you're sitting on the side of the road and you realize you just got hit. And just trying to process what's going on. What do? You pour out your heart to God. You ask for God's help. Maybe you go to the doctor and you get some unexpected news, and it turns your world upside down. What do? You pour out your heart to God. You go to the one who is the refuge. Maybe you've got a problem in a relationship with someone, and it really causes you a lot of grief in your life. What do? Pour it out to God. Go to the one who is your refuge and strength. He's demonstrated he is a reliable refuge. We can depend on him. Now the ball is in our court. We've got to do that. Let go of whatever else we're depending on. Run to the one who is our refuge and strength in trouble, pouring out our heart before him. I'd encourage you in a few moments of quiet now as we close, that you think of the trials and storms that you're facing. I think it'd be appropriate maybe for the piano to play. As we take a few minutes, you think of what right now, what are you facing? Situations in your workplace, in your family? Maybe you look at the world situation or the national situation, and it causes you some worry. There are health needs, there are financial needs. Likely there are multiple storms in your life all at the same time. And I would invite you, as we listen to the piano play, to give those to the Lord and ask for God's help. Pour out your heart to God. Ask him to be your refuge. Depend on him. Remind yourself of who he is, so that he's the one who's going to carry you through. Let's spend some time with the Lord for a few moments. Lord, we come to you and ask for your grace. We're all facing various trials and burdens, and you know each one. Some are very familiar to our church family because they've been on our request list. Others are private and personal, and we just pray in each case that you would help us to go to you as our refuge and strength, to be still, to let go of other things that we have been resting in, and to trust in you alone, and remind ourselves of the truth that you are the one who is always present to help. And give this into your hands and pray for your blessing on each one of our lives. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I'd like to finish with a song this morning.